Good evening, I'm Nadia Johnny and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Israel's Prime Minister says decision is made for full takeover of Gaza. Moscow says it's no longer bound by intermediate missile restrictions. And the Netherlands become the first NATO country to fund a new weapons initiative for Ukraine. Israeli media is reporting that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced plans to seize the entire Gaza Strip. His war cabinet is set to discuss the plan today.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly preparing to launch a full military takeover of the Gaza Strip, with multiple Israeli outlets citing senior officials in his office. Channel 12, I-24 News, and others say the decision has already been made, and Netanyahu's war cabinet will meet on Tuesday to discuss how to proceed. The reported aim is to expand the offensive into all parts of Gaza, including areas where Hamas is believed to be holding Israeli hostages. Netanyahu, in a cabinet meeting on Monday, doubled down on his war goals.
We must continue to stand together and fight together to achieve all our war objectives: the defeat of the enemy, the release of our hostages, and the assurance that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. Later this week, I will convene the cabinet to instruct the IDF on how to achieve these three objectives, all of them without exception.
His office has not officially confirmed the plan. However, the Palestinian Foreign Ministry condemned the reported decision and urged global powers to intervene, warning of further civilian suffering. Pressure is growing both internationally and at home. Protesters gathered outside Netanyahu's office Monday, demanding an end to the war, a comprehensive hostage deal, and scrapping efforts to dismiss the Attorney General. Videos showing visibly emaciated Israeli captives have intensified public anger. Meanwhile, conditions inside Gaza continue to worsen. At least 74 Palestinians, including dozens waiting for aid, were killed in Israeli strikes on Monday, according to local medical sources. Ceasefire talks have collapsed, and Israeli jets resumed bombings near the border.
Canada conducted its first humanitarian airdrop over Gaza on Monday, delivering over £20,000 of critical aid. The Israeli military confirmed that 6 countries participated in the coordinated effort to airdrop 120 food aid packages for Gaza residents. Canada reiterated accusations that Israeli restrictions are obstructing humanitarian relief, calling such actions as a violation of international law. Last week, Canada announced plans to recognise Palestine at the upcoming United Nations General Assembly, intensifying diplomatic pressure on Israel. The Kremlin says Moscow is entitled to take any relevant measures on the deployment of intermediate and shorter-range missiles, as it is now not restricted by anything. That's after Russia withdrew from the unilateral moratorium on land-based missile deployment. Our correspondent has more from Moscow.
The Kremlin is yet to react to the US president's announcement that he has deployed nuclear-capable submarines to what he called appropriate regions. Donald Trump said the move is in response to Russia's former president Dmitry Medvedev's remarks, suggesting that he would be ready to launch a nuclear strike as tensions rise over the conflict in Ukraine. Political observers in Russia suggest that the verbal spat between Trump and Medvedev would come down, but at the same time note Moscow's earlier comments that using threats and ultimatums is unacceptable and would only lead to further escalation. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin said Friday that Moscow is willing to continue talks with Kyiv, but reminded of Russian success on the battlefield. He also said that the first mass-produced Oryezhnik hypersonic missile systems have entered service with Russia's armed forces. Trump's skirmish with Medvedev began a few days ago when Medvedev advised Trump not to play ultimatums with Russia, warning him of a potential conflict between Moscow and Washington. On Monday, Trump reduced the deadline for a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine to 10 or 12 days and threatened imposing, quote, sanctions and maybe tariffs, secondary tariffs. Trump previously spoke about Russia's so-called dead economy and called Medvedev an unsuccessful former president. In response, Medvedev advised Trump to think about a dead hand, an automatic launch system for nuclear weapons.
The Netherlands has become the first NATO country to fund a new US weapons initiative for Ukraine, pledging €500 million. The aid will include Patriot missiles and spare parts. The US ambassador for NATO said more countries are expected to join in the coming weeks. The scheme follows President Trump's call for European allies to finance arms shipments for the war-torn country. NATO chief Mark Rutte urged others to contribute swiftly to meet Kyiv's urgent needs.
The Dutch are just the first of many. You're going to see a series of announcements in the coming weeks. You know, when we announced this facility that allowed our NATO allies to buy U.S. equipment and provide that to Ukraine for their defense, you know, we had a lot of our allies raise their hand and line up. A lot of them are coming together in groups to pool their money and their resources together to provide these armaments and munitions. And so, you know, it's the whole purpose of NATO and what makes this alliance the strongest is this platform we have to communicate amongst allies and to really talk about these issues and come up with solutions.
Joining me now is Diogo Castro Silva, a political analyst in Casablanca. Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, my first question is how significant is this military aid in helping to stop the war in Ukraine?
Well, the military part, sorry, I could not understand your question. Could you repeat?
Yes, of course. I was just saying now that obviously the Netherlands have committed to sending this, how significant is that going to help with Ukraine and the war?
Well, I think it's pretty significant, not so much because of just Netherlands, but part of the strategy on the last NATO summit, and even one could argue of the EU accepting the agreement, the trade agreement, which was viewed by some as kind of unfavorable to the European Union, was in fact to maintain Washington attached to the security effort. And in that sense, the Netherlands, starting with this facility of buying US-made weapons to export to Ukraine, is a very important and welcome sign.
Definitely, and we know that there are going to be more countries that will be also joining the Netherlands in, supporting Ukraine and sending weapons. Do you think that this will help combat the war that Ukraine is having with Russia? Is that going to push them back a bit?
Well, the question of supplying weapons to Ukraine is crucial. There is only one party that can stop this war, which is Putin and Russia themselves. So other than that, the way is to impose costs in the battlefield. And that means supplying Ukraine with weapons sufficient for it to defend itself and to impose those costs on the Russian armed forces and change the equation for Russia, leading to Russia being interested to stop the war. I don't see, to be honest, any other way.
Definitely, and obviously now we have a number of European members all gathered together in support to making sure that the war is stopped in Ukraine. Do you think that's a scare tactic for Russia? Do you think Putin is paying attention to that?
I think he is, but one must understand that Putin is on its own. One of the questions that makes a lot of people very hard to understand Russian motivations is that they are not particularly rational in the sense that most Western analysts and politicians view them. It doesn't make sense in a pure rational way, other than you understand that for Putin and his own vision of Russia, this is an existential war to recreate some kind of a mystical Russian mirror, a Russian space. More than the ex-Soviet Union is the Russian Empire. And so this is his this motivation is warped inside of all these mythical views of Russian history and of Russian origin. So the question, he will continue the war and in pursuit of these objectives, unless pursuing the war is so costly that it makes his own regime existence in doubt, meaning unless he cannot go further. So this having Ukraine being supported by these countries, having the supply of weapons, and most importantly, being politically united around the objective of defeating Russia, is what can change the equation. There is no a rational deal, like, for example, let's give territory and perhaps he will stop. No, this is a question of really increasing the costs for him to pursue this war.
And my final question is Kyiv. So President of Ukraine, Zelensky, has welcomed, obviously, this help and support. Do you think that's enough for Ukraine in their support for, ending the war?
No, this supply or this round of supplies will not be enough. There are two issues there. One, for Ukraine armed forces to plan their combat operations, it's very important having long-term understanding of their supply. So this means you will have to be there on as long as it takes for the war to end. And secondly, and also most important, is that this is a high attritional war, meaning one of the reasons why Western countries were so ill-prepared to support Ukraine is that for the last, 40 years, we were battling, the West had been battling, sorry for the expression, and we are in a different, and so anti-insurgents operations. We are now in a state-to-state conflict, which is based upon industrial capacity, among other things. So this is what it doesn't end quickly, this kind of war.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me this evening, Diego. Thank you. The European Union is putting a pause on billions of retaliatory tariffs against the United States. The tax hikes were targeting US goods after a new trade agreement was struck with President Donald Trump last month.
The European Union will suspend 2 packages of planned countermeasures against the United States tariffs for 6 months, according to a European Commission spokesperson. The decision follows an informal meeting between US President Donald Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Scotland on the 27th of July. As part of the new deal, the EU will halt tariffs worth 93 billion euros that were due to come into effect this week. The duties targeted a range of US goods, including steel, aluminium, cars, and agricultural products. Trump claims the agreement includes a 15% tariff on EU exports to the US, 600 billion euros in European investment in America, and a massive 750 billion worth of US energy sales to Europe. He had threatened 30% if a deal was not done by his 1st of August deadline. Trade between the 27-member bloc and the United States last year totaled almost $2 trillion. However, the deal has sparked criticism within Europe. Former High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, described it as politically damaging. He accuses the Commission of caving in to Trump's pressure and compromising the EU's strategic independence. The European Union and several European leaders had warned that if a trade deal with the US was not reached by the 1st of August, the bloc would impose retaliatory tariffs on American goods.
A new trade agreement between the US and the EU has stirred criticism across Europe, as many believe the EU gave up too much too soon.
Mr. President, the President...
The ink is barely dry on a new US-EU trade deal, and already it's sparking political ripples across Europe. Under mounting pressure from Washington, the European Commission signed a new agreement with the United States. One, critics argue, strongly favours American interests. The deal suspends planned EU tariffs and boosts European purchases of US energy and technology in a bid to avoid a full-blown trade war. But many in Europe say Commission President Ursula von der Leyen conceded too quickly, fearing retaliation from President Donald Trump. They claim the agreement is one-sided, benefiting Washington while exposing Europe's economic vulnerabilities. Germany, France and Italy, the EU's largest economies, are struggling with weak growth, high debt and, in some cases, recession. Meanwhile, the US economy remains resilient, growing at an annual rate of 3%, fueled by strong job numbers and consumer demand. Analysts say Brussels had little leverage. A prolonged trade war would have hurt Europe far more than the US, especially amid the ongoing fallout from the war in Ukraine. Facing political and economic pressure, the EU appears to have chosen a tactical retreat. The message from Washington is clear. US trade policy is shifting to serve its own strategic interests, especially as tensions with China rise. For Europe, the challenge now is to strengthen its own economic and defence posture to restore transatlantic balance. Supporters of the deal say it was the most realistic option under the circumstances, but the debate has reignited deeper concerns about Europe's reliance on the United States and whether the EU is ready to stand up for its own economic interests in an increasingly competitive world.
India has hit back at criticism from the United States and the European Union over its ongoing imports of Russian oil. New Delhi insists these imports are essential to keep energy affordable for millions of its citizens.
In an official statement published by India's Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi defended its continued imports of Russian oil amid growing criticism from the United States and the European Union over the ongoing war in Ukraine. The statement said India began buying Russian oil after supplies were redirected to Europe following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It added that the US initially encouraged India to increase these imports to help stabilize global energy markets during a volatile period as the conflict disrupted supplies worldwide. India's foreign ministry also highlighted what it called apparent double standards in targeting New Delhi, noting that both the European Union and the United States continue significant trade with Russia despite the war. The EU's bilateral trade with Russia reached nearly 67.5 billion euros in goods alone in 2024, alongside 17.2 billion euros in services the previous year. European imports of liquefied natural gas from Russia hit a record 16.5 million tonnes last year. Washington has threatened to impose much higher tariffs on Indian goods, accusing India of buying discounted Russian oil and reselling it for profit, complicating diplomatic relations amid the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. India's total trade with Russia surged to a record $68.7 billion in the last fiscal year, reflecting expanding economic ties even as the war continues to reshape global alliances. Experts say India faces a difficult balancing act, securing reliable, affordable energy for its growing economy, while navigating mounting geopolitical pressure from the West and the global call to isolate Russia over its actions in Ukraine. New Delhi says the criticism is unjustified and that it will take all necessary measures to protect its national interests and economic security.
To talk about this further, I am now joined by Gulshan Shakdeva, Professor of European Studies in New Delhi. Hello.
Hello.
Gulshan, my first question is India being unfairly targeted by the US and EU for its purchase of Russian oil?
Well, I think the challenge what India is faced is serious. One, particularly for the As far as the India and the United States, the trade is concerned, it's a very important trading partner, and United States market is quite important for few products, particularly in textiles, electronics, and many other areas. So it means, and already, President Trump has announced about 25% tariff on Indian products. So on trade front with the United States, India is quite cautious and serious. They are negotiating, and they are hoping that in the next few weeks they'll be able to make some deal. But as far as the oil, purchase of oil from Russia is concerned, that's something very different matter, because India feels that that's a sovereign decision of India to buy or not to buy from anyone. And currently India buys roughly about 2 million barrels a day from Russia, discounted oil, and which is roughly about 35% of total Indian imports from outside. And this has stabilized the Indian energy market, and India also feel that this has also stabilized global energy market, because a large part of this imports also, they are processed in India and they are further exported to the European and other markets. So on that front, I think India is quite firm. But on India and the US trade deal, they are trying to negotiate, so they are very careful about this.
Yes, definitely. So, and also Trump has accused India, saying that they're profiting from resale of Russian oil, which is indirectly financing the war in Ukraine. Is that a fair statement that he's made?
No, in fact, I think, the Russian market, they are selling products to the Chinese market, to the Indian market, and India is not violating anything. In fact, what India is buying, this is buying, below the price which was set up by the European Union. So there is no violation of any kind, and India also does not believe in any kind of unilateral sanctions against any country. And the major challenge actually for India has been how to repay the amounts to Russia, because Russia has been cut off from the SWIFT. But in the last 2 years, they have been able to find ways to, some of the money, some of the bilateral things have been happening at the same time. India is also, paying some other currencies within the BRICS. So, they have found certain mechanism to make these transactions. So that has been the difficulty. But otherwise, India feel that India is not violating any kind of, rule. So this is a sovereign decision of India, and Russia is India's very, close and trusted partner. And on this front, I think there'll be less compromise by India.
And India has also pushed back with what President Trump has been saying, and actually stated that Europe is also purchasing, from Russia, fertilizer, chemicals, and the US is importing uranium hexafluoride from Russia. Does that undermine Trump's request to stop India from purchasing Russian oil?
Well, this is what, in fact, Indian policymakers have been saying, that, if India was not buying oil from Russia, the volatility in the global market would have been much more. And it's not just only India is buying, in fact, the Europeans themselves are buying. They have obviously, the numbers have reduced, but still they continue to buy not just only oil, but other commodities as well. And many other partners also buying. And in fact, President Trump is in fact trying to make certain deals with all countries, including perhaps with Russia at some point of time. So every country is looking its own interests. So India is also trying to, protect its consumers, because India is a, energy deficient country, and economy is growing, one of the fastest growing economy in the world. So India has to find, energy from wherever it is able to purchase. And particularly after Ukraine war, what happened that, the Europeans started buying all products, from the Asian markets, particularly LNG and others, which created further problems for a country like India. So in that sense, the Russia has been a useful partner for India during those difficult times, and India would like to continue to buy. And India does not buy the argument by Americans or by the European Union that it is violating any kind of sanctions or anything else, because even the oil is not under sanction of the US, and it's anyway it's the sovereign decision of the Indian government to buy commodities. And it's also not just the government. In fact, these are the companies which are buying. These are public sector companies and the private sector companies which are buying. And if they find that, so prices are relatively competitive from the Russian market, of course. Earlier India used to buy from Iran. Even Iran was under sanctions, so India more or less stopped buying from Iran. India was also buying from Venezuela. That also came under sanctions. So there are difficulties for India. So that within that scenario, I think the Russian energy has been very, very useful, and I think India will continue to buy.
And do you think that by India continuing to buy, Russian oil, that they are aligning themselves with Russia and what they're doing? Can that be seen on the international stage?
No, it's not a question of allying with Russia, because Russia will continue to produce energy and continue to be a major exporter, and India continue to buy energy from the international market. And India's relations with Russia continue to be very, very strong, because in fact, they're very strong strategic partnership with Russia, and they also kind of trust which has been built between Indian and Russian policy makers over decades, that continue to be there. And it's only about energy. In fact, Russia is also India's major suppliers of defense equipments, and also India buys fertilizers and other stuff from Russia. So Russia has been an important partner for India, and I think in this kind of volatile situation, India feels that yes, India would like to see that the conflict in Ukraine would like to end. In fact, Indian Prime Minister has been continuing saying that through dialogue and diplomacy this has to be resolved. But at the same time, because this is really conflict is creating serious problem for the countries of the global South. And also particularly for India, particularly for energy, and also for fertilizers, and also for edible oils, etc. Many things actually India face serious problems because of conflict, in Russia and Ukraine. So I think it's not India is aligned with Russia. India, of course, India is sympathetic to Russia, and India also feel that Russia also has certain role within the European security architecture. So, the Europeans and other partners, they need to really work with Russia and resolve this issue. And in fact, Ukraine is also a very close, friendly country for India. So India really would like to see ending as quickly as possible. And in fact, India was quite hopeful when President Trump was making attempt that, he'll be able to end this conflict soon. And in fact, there were certain positive trends. And India continued to believe that this conflict would end soon, and then perhaps the markets would be much more stable energy markets, and India would be able to work with Russia and with Ukraine both. In fact, India would also like to work even with the reconstruction of Ukraine. So this is why the Indian understanding about this conflict which is going on, which has really affected negatively many of the countries in the global South.
Thank you so much, Gulshan, for joining me this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cambodia and Thailand launched talks in Malaysia on Monday after deadly clashes along their shared border last month. It's ahead of a key ministerial level meeting on Thursday, as a fragile ceasefire continues to hold a week after the two sides both agreed to stop fighting.
Preliminary talks between Thailand and Cambodia began on Monday in Malaysia, the first direct engagement since both sides agreed to a ceasefire last week. The meeting sets the stage for a key ministerial summit on Thursday. The recent clashes, the worst in over a decade, killed at least 43 people and displaced more than 300,000. Artillery exchanges and airstrikes erupted following a landmine blast that injured several Thai soldiers near a disputed section of the border nearly 2 weeks ago on the 23rd of July. The ceasefire, brokered with the help from Malaysia, the US and China, remains fragile. Officials are now finalising terms for a temporary defence attaché monitoring force, a precursor to a formal ASEAN peacekeeping mission.
It is now at the final stage of discussions to be agreed upon before they move on to the next meeting. We are also discussing the proposed ASEAN monitoring team, including the detailed actions we intend to undertake. Additionally, we are refining the forms of assistance we require from major powers that are also present to provide support.
Long-standing tensions over disputed border areas and ancient temples have sparked repeated flare-ups. In May, a Cambodian soldier was killed, and a July landmine blast triggered Thai airstrikes using F-16s and Gripens. The current ceasefire does not address the root causes of the conflict. Cambodia recently proposed returning to the International Court of Justice to resolve the territorial dispute, an idea firmly rejected by Thailand. While the Malaysia-hosted talks mark progress, analysts warn the ceasefire will be difficult to sustain without neutral monitors on the ground.
Very honored to meet you all today.
The third United Nations Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries opened in Turkmenistan under the theme Driving Progress Through Partnerships. The conference will run from the 5th to the 8th of August. UN Chief Antonio Guterres opened the meeting, naming Turkmenistan's president as chair. He highlighted the event's goals, Turkmenistan's policies, and plans for international cooperation. The conference addresses the trade and connectivity challenges faced by 32 landlocked developing countries, home to around 600 million people. At the UN gathering in Turkmenistan, Georgia continues strengthening its ties in the region. A key meeting between Georgian and Azerbaijani prime ministers highlighted growing cooperation and shared goals. Here's more from them on that from Tbilisi.
During the UN conference on landlocked developing countries, Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze met with Azerbaijani Prime Minister Ali Asadov. According to Georgia's government administration, the two leaders discussed their country's strong strategic partnership and the ongoing positive momentum across the multiple sectors. They emphasized the importance of joint regional projects such as transport and energy links, which they say are critical for the long-term development in the South Caucasus. Both sides also stressed that the regional peace and stability remains key to prosperity. Prime Minister Kobakhidze reaffirmed Georgia's commitment to achieving long-lasting peace and stability through the dialogue and diplomacy. The Georgian delegation at the UN conference included Foreign Minister Maka Bochorishvili, Economy Minister Mariam Kvivishvili, and the head of Georgia's government administration, Levan Georgioliani. The third UN conference on landlocked developing countries focuses on improving connectivity, cooperation, and economy resilience among the countries that have no direct access to the sea, a goal that Georgia continues to support through its regional partnerships. It's Nini Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, A News.
Also at that UN gathering, Iran's first Vice President Mohammad Reza Aref said that Tehran supports development of transit routes as well as peaceful relations among its neighbouring countries to promote economic and trade exchanges. Our correspondent has more.
First Vice President Aref, who is in Turkmenistan to participate at the third UN conference on landlocked developing countries, says that development of transit corridors is a priority and Iran supports establishment of peace and security among the neighboring and regional countries. According to the website of the Iranian First Vice President's office, Aref said he will be exchanging views in Turkmenistan, especially on the transit sector, considering Iran's exceptional geographical position as a potential hub connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. He said the serious priority of the Islamic Republic of Iran is the development of corridors that connect these continents. This important issue will be emphasized in this visit, he added. The third UN conference on landlocked developing countries is held from the 5th of August to the 8th of August in the city of Avaza in Turkmenistan. Its objective is to offer a chance to the landlocked developing countries as they face hurdles in trade, connectivity, development, and prosperity because they lack direct sea access. On the sidelines of the Avaza conference, First Vice President Aref met with Chairman of Presidential Council of Libya, Mohammed Al-Menfi, during which The Iranian official supported the inter-Libyan talks and welcomed the increase in bilateral trade exchanges following reopening of embassies in Tehran and Tripoli. Aref also had a meeting with the Armenian President Vahagan Khachaturian, in which he stressed expansion of Tehran-Yerevan relations, trade relations, and welcomed the ongoing peace talks between Armenia and Azerbaijan without interference of foreign countries. During his stay in Turkmenistan, Aref is scheduled to meet UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Turkmen officials, as well as a number of participants of the conference. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
President Trump is reportedly close to facilitating a peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, according to Senator Steve Daines. He noted that previous mediation attempts by third parties had failed and criticized past U.S. administrations for not prioritizing peace in the region. Congressman Joe Wilson also praised Trump's mediation efforts, calling him an unmatched peacemaker and suggesting that a peace deal between Baku and Yerevan could be his next achievement. Turkey's parliament has launched a new cross-party commission to address Kurdish rights following the announcement by the PKK of its disbandment. After nearly 4 decades of armed attacks against the Turkish state, the parliament speaker opened the first session calling it a historic turning point in the country's fight against terrorism. He said the aim is not to change laws but to reinforce brotherhood through dialogue. He underlined the need to move beyond a security-only approach and focus on freedom, equality and justice. Staying with Turkey, its fast-growing defense industry is gaining global recognition. European countries are rearming and the demand for reliable suppliers is growing. Our Turkey correspondent Elia Aziz has more.
Turkey is fast emerging as a key player in Europe's evolving defense landscape, rising from regional partnership to a global defense supplier in the face of mounting geopolitical tensions. From the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine to growing uncertainty over the long-term U.S. military presence on the continent, European nations are rapidly rearming, and Turkey's defense sector is stepping in to fill that demand. Defense exports from Turkey soared from $2.3 billion in 2020 to over $7.1 billion in 2024, placing the country as the world's 11th largest arms exporter, according to Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Turkey's exports to Europe alone jumped from $369 million to $1.2 billion over the past 3 years, now accounting for 22% of its total defense sales. Poland, the first EU and NATO member to purchase Bayraktar TB2 drones, received all 24 units by mid-2024. Albania and Croatia followed, which acquires logistics, training, and command and control systems. In 2024, Aselsan launched a regional office in North Macedonia to coordinate activities across the Balkans. Havelsan, another important Turkish defense player, won a Romanian tender to modernize maritime surveillance using its MATRA software platform. Recent collaborations that took place this year in 2025 are also reinforcing its foothold. Turkish drone maker Baykar is partnering with Italy's Leonardo, while Turkish Aerospace Industries is co-producing the Hurjet light combat jet in Spain. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte recently called Turkey's defense base impressive and urged deeper integration with European systems. With both innovation and reliable delivery, Turkey is not only purchasing, but increasingly the builder of Europe's future security architecture. For A News, this is Aliya Aziz, Istanbul, Turkey.
Turkey has secured another major boost for its energy sector, with the World Bank approving hundreds of its millions in new financing. The latest deal is part of a broader push to modernise infrastructure and cut reliance on imported energy. The World Bank has approved almost $750 million in financing for Turkey's energy transmission overhaul, bringing the total international support this year to around $7 billion. The funding will help the state electricity company modernise the grid and expand renewable energy capacity. Two major humanitarian projects have been signed by British organisations this week, aiming to tackle food insecurity and climate vulnerability in Afghanistan, one of the world's most fragile regions. Our Tahim Bahis has more from Kabul.
In a joint initiative, the UK government and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations have launched a new program to improve food security, protect rural livelihoods, and help Afghan communities withstand climate and economic shocks. The initiative, known as the Resilient Agriculture Livelihoods Project, will reach over 150,000 people across 15 provinces in the next 10 months. The focus is on small-scale farmers, livestock keepers, and the most vulnerable, especially woman-headed households and widows. This effort runs alongside another major UK-funded project led by Afghan Aid and its partners in the Afghanistan Resilient Consortium. Backed by £22 million, the three-year initiative is designed to combat the root causes of climate vulnerability and food insecurity across the country. Together, these projects aim to reduce disaster risks, promote sustainable farming, and offer long-term resilience for Afghan communities still reeling from years of crisis. Meanwhile, a new report from UNICEF reveals the dire toll of ongoing malnutrition in Afghanistan. Over 3.5 million children under the age of 5 are suffering from malnutrition, with 1.4 million experiencing severe acute cases. Many of these children are under 6 months old, and UNICEF warns that without urgent intervention, the crisis will only worsen. In a country where proper nutrition can mean the difference between life and death, international collaboration remains vital for protecting the next generation of Afghans. Tamim Bahis reporting for A News from Kabul, Afghanistan.
The National Geographic magazine wrote an article about Azerbaijan's wine culture and highlighted Azerbaijan's five most best contemporary vineyards. It stated how the country is emerging as a modern wine tourism destination.
From a forgotten cellar in Goygol to world-class wineries featured in National Geographic, Azerbaijan's wine renaissance is both ancient and forward-looking. 3 years ago, local guide Raoul Abazadeh cleared the rubbish that hid a historic cellar built by German settler Christoph Vorer. Beneath those doors lay narrow corridors, termite-ridden barrels, and relics dating back to the 1930s. Today, visitors drink indigenous wines like Madrasa and crisp Bayan Shira, alongside Chardonnay, Saperavi, Rkatsiteli, and Pinot Noir in this restored grotto of heritage. National Geographic's article showcases 5 of the country's standout modern vineyards, each contributing to Azerbaijan's renewed reputation as a wine destination. One vineyard, nestled at the foothills of the mountains at 400 meters elevation, crafts premium reds and whites, offering tastings with panoramic views. Another, in the Ismaili region, draws on native grape varieties to produce red, white, and rosé wines. Guests can explore vast underground cellars and join in the seasonal grape harvest. In the rolling hills of Shamaki, the country's first certified organic vineyard pairs wine production with a guest house and museum, showcasing unique blends that reflect the region's soil and history. A nearby vineyard in the same area is known for its pomegranate wines and dry reds made from local varietals aged in Slavonian oak, complemented by crisp whites that highlight the country's winemaking diversity. Azerbaijan's wine story spans millennia, with archaeological evidence of winemaking dating to the 2nd millennium BCE. Though the Soviet era dealt a heavy blow,
destroying over 80% of vineyards during the anti-alcohol campaigns of the 1980s, the industry has seen a dramatic revival since the early 2000s. Today, over 15 wineries operate across regions such as Ganja Kazakh, Shirvan, and Gabala, supported by national wine routes and tourism initiatives. National Geographic's piece reinforces that Azerbaijan's wine renaissance isn't just local law, it's gaining global attention. From rediscovered cellars in Goygol to featured vineyards across the country, the nation's wine culture is being recast as a destination for heritage and innovation.
That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and have a good night.